They honestly did not know if they would be able to see their sweet Indy alive again. Very, very unfortunately, this medication did not work. They completely lifeless hope that she was going to be able to take her daughter out of this hospital. This precious little 3-week-old baby going in for open heart surgery when you started the day out completely normal. Unfortunately, the CT scan and the MRI scan led to some of the most gut-wrenching, horrific news that you can receive as a parent regarding your child. Welcome back to my channel. I am so honored for everybody who clicked on today's video. This is such a special, important video, and I am so incredibly grateful that you are here. Today, we are going to be talking about a beautiful little girl named Indy, who unfortunately, at less than 2 weeks old, went completely pale while her mom was changing her diaper, was rushed to the ER. They found no pulse, and she went into heart surgery. This is an extremely emotional story, and Jenica, Indy's mom, was kind enough to let me share it with you guys to raise awareness not only for cerebral palsy, but also for Indy's experience, and I am so grateful to be sharing this incredible family with you. I will also be donating 100% of our membership funds to Jenica and Gavin, Indy's parents. Hunter and I will also be matching that donation so that they have a little bit of aid with their medical bills and their family going through this heartbreaking experience. They are truly such an incredible family. I've had such an incredible time talking to Jenica and relating to her on so many different things throughout their experience. Indy is actually Jenica and Gavin's second little girl. When Jenica got pregnant, she had a completely normal, low-risk pregnancy. Everything was completely fine. They were so excited to welcome Indy into their family. When Jenica delivered Indy, she only had a 4-hour labor. Everything went pretty seamless and quick.
Oh, look at her face. Oh my goodness.
Is it Indy? Say hi, Indy.
Oh, she's crying.
It's okay. It's okay.
Does she need a bean cokes?
Say good girl. Can you say
Patting
good girl?
her? Can you give her kisses? Oh. Do you want to kiss her on the cheek?
Indy seemed completely fine. However, she was having a little bit of a harder time breathing. So they actually sent her to the NICU where they placed her on a CPAP machine. Fortunately, Indy started breathing phenomenal with the treatment of the CPAP, and she was only in the NICU for a few hours, and then she got to go right back to mom. At that point, the doctors really were not concerned at all. They did hear a slight murmur the day that Indy was born in her heart. However, by the second day of her life, they couldn't hear it at all, and they didn't have any concerns. In fact, the doctors actually let Jenica and Gavin know that it is relatively common for a baby to have a small heart murmur right when they are born before their PDA closes, which is basically communicating with the baby that the mother is no longer aiding in the performance of the baby's organs. At her 2-week checkup, Jenica and Gavin did mention to their pediatrician that it just seemed like her breathing patterns were slightly off. However, it can take up to 6 weeks for a baby's breathing patterns to regulate, so they didn't seem very concerned, which led to Jenica and Gavin really not thinking much of it. Again, this was their second baby. They had never experienced any trauma with their littles prior, and they were paying really close attention and talking to everybody that they needed to make sure that Indy was healthy. However, the following week on January 7th, it was a completely normal day. Indy was about 3 weeks old. She was born on December 11th, and this was following that 2-week appointment where they were reassured that everything looked great with Indy's breathing. They were having a great family day. They actually went out and got donuts that morning, and then mom went to change Indy's diaper and she went completely white. Now, for any mother, that is so petrifying. I'm sure that so many of you understand, not only is that absolutely terrifying to see your baby go completely white, but you're obviously already dealing with postpartum anxiety and you're just so nervous that baby's okay at all times. So I'm sure you can imagine just initially how shocking and traumatic that was for both Gavin and Jenica. Now, thankfully, the pediatrician's office is actually right around the corner from their house. So as soon as Indy went so pale that she was basically white, they rushed her over to the pediatrician's office, and immediately things seemed to start getting worse. They were not able to find a pulse in either of her legs, so they immediately put her on 2 liters of oxygen and then decided that they wanted to rush her to the Primary Children's emergency room. Primary Children's is the main hospital here in Utah for most of the kids kids, especially kids with really severe problems or anything that is extremely emergent. That is where Beckham has had all of his surgeries. So we have a very, very special place in our hearts for the Primary Children's Hospital. So that is where Jenica, Gavin, and Indy ended up. After Indy was stable and on 1 liter of oxygen, they headed to the Primary Children's emergency room where the doctor alerted them so that they were waiting and ready for Indy as soon as they got there. While Jenica got checked in, Gavin was immediately rushed back where they could get all of the vitals for Indy. And that is when they were told basically immediately that things were really, really severe. They were going to call an emergent code just to get more hands on deck so that Indy got all of the care that she needed. As a parent, I just relate so much to things being an emergency in terms of your children, especially when you're in the hospital and you know that things are potentially life-threatening. My heart just truly goes out to them because I know in that moment, the trauma that you suffer, not only because of your love for your baby, but also your love for your spouse who is also experiencing the same thing that you are. It is so emotional. It is truly so difficult to understand it unless you've been through it. My heart just really, really goes out to them, and I'm sure that so many of you can relate to how scary that was. Gavin and Jenica were of course right there with Indy, and they were just watching them take care of their sweet baby, waiting for answers, which I'm sure just felt like an eternity. The head ER doctor finally came in to give mom and dad an update, and they let them know that it was really severe. Things were not looking great. She was really, really struggling to breathe. They were still not able to find a pulse in either of her legs, and she had mottling all over her body. Due to the symptoms that were present, they had started to really worry about Indy's heart. So in that time, they had called a cardiology consult. The cardiologist immediately came in and gave Indy an echo on her heart, which is when they told Gavin and Jenica that she was very, very sick and she was going to require immediate heart surgery. The emotions that obviously came rushing in, fearing for their daughter's life, are more intense than I can even describe. But they asked the doctor a million questions, as any parent would, and it kind of started to click and process for both of them how serious the situation was and that heart surgery was imminent regardless of her age. I mean, honestly, you guys, can you imagine this precious little 3-week-old baby going in for open heart surgery when you started the day out completely normal, getting donuts with your family? It is just so petrifying. Life is so precious, and there is just nothing like your love for your child. I can imagine just the emotions that they were feeling in this moment, learning all of this information so quickly. It's almost so quick that you're not even able to fully process it at the time. So there are actually 2 locations for Primary Children's Hospital in Utah. So they were at a location in a city named Lehi, and they were calling their family, preparing them for what was about to happen to Indy so that they had the support that they needed and to update those who love and care for her. And they were getting ready to be transported to the main Salt Lake location for Indy to go into surgery. Just to give you guys an idea, the Lehi location and the Salt Lake location are almost an hour apart, and Jenica was able to be life flighted with Indy in the helicopter, and it took them 8 minutes to get to the Salt Lake hospital, which Jenica described as just feeling like an eternity. I mean, that is such a surreal moment. As soon as they arrived, Indy was immediately transported to the pediatric ICU, and that is when they were greeted with too many nurses and doctors to count. This all just feels so familiar and so terrifying. The overwhelm, again, is just too much to describe. As parents, just looking around the room and knowing that the fate of your child is in those doctors and nurses' hands is so terrifying, but that also comes with such an immense level of gratitude for those medical care workers, which is exactly what Gavin and Jenica were feeling. Due to the stress that had been put on Indy's body the past few weeks from struggling to breathe, they did decide that it was necessary for her to be put into a mild sedation through intubation. In addition to that, they also gave her a medication to help her heart by reopening her PDA. Not only were they hoping that this would take some stress off of her heart, but they were also hoping that this would buy them a couple days before they needed to perform the surgery. Very, very unfortunately, this medication did not work, and they were informed that they needed to perform surgery within the next couple of hours. Obviously, this is absolutely petrifying for any parent to hear, and they were just trying to emotionally prepare themselves for for their 3-week-old baby to go into heart surgery. They were really just being hopeful and faithful that this was the worst of what was to come. They were able to meet with the anesthesiologist, the head surgeon, and the surgical nurse, and then Gavin and Jenica handed off baby Indy to go back for surgery. When Jenica was explaining her emotions to me when Indy went back for surgery, it was so emotional. At that point, they honestly did not know if they would be able to see their sweet Indy alive again. They did not know what the surgery's outcome was going to be, but very fortunately, the head surgeon was able to come out and let them know the most incredible news that the surgery had gone nearly perfect and that Gavin and Jenica were going to be reunited with Indy shortly. A couple of days after the surgery, Indy was still intubated and she seemed to be healing relatively well. They did a couple breathing trials in order to see if she was able to breathe on her own. Both of those tests came back failed, which led the doctors to wanting to do an ultrasound in her head and in her neck. Quickly after the hospital ordered a CT scan and an MRI scan, they were able to see a much bigger picture of everything that was going on inside of Indy's little body. Unfortunately, the CT scan and the MRI scan led to some of the most gut-wrenching, horrific news that you can receive as a parent regarding your child. Indy had suffered multiple severe strokes in her brain, which led to not only inflammation, but also to seizures. At this point, they were unsure if she would ever be able to move on her own, let alone breathe on her own. Her strokes were so severe that they impacted all of the right side of her brain and also a small part of the left side of her brain. At this point, Jenica was just looking at Gavin with a completely lifeless hope that she was going to be able to take her daughter out of this hospital. Obviously, both parents were completely numb and just struggling to process everything that was happening. I mean, you guys, this happened in such a short period of time and was so shocking for these parents. It is just so heartbreaking. Jenica said that one of the most difficult parts of this experience is that even after extensive tests, they really were not able to tell them much more. And the phrase that they said over and over to her just haunts her to this day. And it was, she will tell us when she's ready. As a mother, seeing your child in that state, you are truly so helpless. It is just gut-wrenching. It is so unnatural to be separated from your child, and all you want to do is nurture them and care for them, especially right after they're born. And this just honestly shatters my soul for both of these parents. And sweet little Indy was just doing everything she could to fight for her life. Once the swelling started to go down in Indy's brain, there was very little movement where she would actually try to initiate some of her own breaths on her own. At this point, they took every single movement, every single twitch as a positive and as a win and a victory. Even though they weren't even sure if it was intentional or just a reflex, they wanted to remain as hopeful as they possibly could, as would any parent. As the days went on, she did start initiating breaths a little bit more and moving a little bit more. And after what felt like obviously an eternity, on day 6, they were finally able to hold her. This was so emotional for me when I was hearing about it, as I'm sure it's been extremely emotional for you to hear her story. I remember being in a very similar situation where I wasn't able to hold Beckham until day 7, and he was covered in wires and tubes. And that is exactly what Indy looked like. She was covered in tubes and wires and just what appeared to be completely lifeless and helpless in that incubator. And mom and dad obviously were by her side every second. So that moment of getting to hold your child and reunite with your child again is so emotional. This next part just makes me so emotional because I know how real it is. It took 3 nurses just to get Indy onto Jenica's chest. And obviously Jenica just never wanted to let Indy go at this point. She needed that moment with her so badly. But what is just so special and so healing is it's really Indy that needed that moment with her mom, because after Jenica held her, she started showing signs of improvement so much more. And I just know that Jenica was aiding and healing Indy's little body. I will stand by that forever. The power and love of a mother, there is nothing on earth that is like it. The next day, Indy was showing so much interest and so many signs of wanting to breathe on her own that they did another breathing trial. Not only did she pass this trial, but she actually went on even longer than she needed to in order to pass it. For the next 2 days, Indy did phenomenal with her breathing, so much so that by the 3rd day after skin to skin with mom, she was able to ease up her sedation medicine to almost nothing and remove her breathing tube. They kept her on oxygen with a cannula, but of course that was really, really hard for Indy. I'm sure very stimulating for her. So because Indy was so irritated with the cannula, they actually let her try room air, and she did so phenomenal that they never put her back on oxygen. And if that is not a testament to a mother's love and a mother's touch, I don't know what is. After this, they were actually able to move Indy to a different floor. She graduated the CICU, which was a huge step because at this point, mom and dad had really not been able to touch her hardly at all. And when she moved to the main floor for 2 days, they were able to hold her, change her diapers, and this kind of got them back into the groove of caring for her, which I'm sure was absolutely petrifying after everything that had happened. And they were so confident that she was doing so well that after 2 days on the main floor, they were ready to discharge Indy to go home. No matter how intuitive you are as a mother, it is petrifying to bring home a medically complex baby. You just feel so inferior to the doctors and nurses that have been taking care of her. She had been hooked up to machines that were telling you exactly what was happening in her body. So even though it was very terrifying, you had this sense of relief being able to see her oxygen stats, being able to see her heartbeat. And now she's at home with mom and dad are clearly terrified. Jenica said it was so overwhelming. It gave her so much anxiety, even though she was so happy to have Indy back in her arms and back at home. It was just really petrifying because, as I'm sure you know, the love of a parent, you are already so worried about your child. It's so heightened in instances like this. So it was really, really scary. Jenica and Gavin had never handled an NG tube or placed one, let alone done 100% of feedings through the NG tube. So it gave them a lot of anxiety. Jenica said that after they got home, it was like her home was so different. Everything was set up different. Just the energy in the home was so different. They had her set up with so many different doctors, nurses, therapists. She couldn't even keep track of them all. Jenica and Gavin obviously were extremely overwhelmed, but they were so grateful for how much help they had. You are going to be shocked when you hear about Indy's team of doctors. It's actually so long, I'm going to read it to you because Jenica did send it to me. So Indy's team consisted of her pediatrician, cardiologist, neurologist, physical therapist, occupational therapist, feeding therapist, dietitian, complex care coordinator, in addition to her kids on the move therapist. Now I bet a lot of those sound familiar because that is identical to Beckham's team of doctors, which leads me into the biggest connection that Hunter and I have with Jenica and Gavin. Indy was diagnosed with severe cerebral palsy, in addition to having a high chance of autism and cognition/behavioral challenges. As I have shared in so much depth on my channel, there are so many complex emotions that Jenica and Gavin are feeling right now with a diagnosis of cerebral palsy for their sweet little Indy at such a young age, and especially having a very low risk pregnancy. There was nothing to prepare or lead to this expectation of a diagnosis. However, I am a firm believer that nothing can really prepare you for any sort of loss that is accompanied with the love of a parent. As you guys can tell from this story, Indy is obviously such a little fighter. She has more strength than most of us will ever have in our entire lifetime. She has already defied so many odds that she was told she would not be able to do already. Jenica shared with me that one of the scariest things about the diagnosis is the unknowns, which I can deeply relate to. Not knowing the future of your child is a heartbreak I wouldn't wish upon anybody. It is just so complex that obviously Indy being able to accomplish these things has given Jenica and Gavin so much hope and so much peace, but it's also accompanied with emotions of grief and loss and the fear of not knowing what she will be capable of in the future. They have shared that one of the hardest things for them to be able to do is feel two different emotions at the exact same time, even though they are on completely opposite ends of the spectrum. Jenica and Gavin have obviously felt extremely isolated in this experience. They had never really heard anybody talk about grief and being able to grieve a child while that child is still living and still here with you. That is, of course, not to negate anyone who has experienced child loss. That is an emotion that I truly believe is the hardest thing you can experience in this life. However, all sorts of loss with children, nothing negates the other. It is so incredibly painful and difficult to watch your child's future be taken from them, or watch abilities that you believed they'd always have, that most people have, stripped from them. You would do anything to switch them places. You would do anything to give them the life that you've been able to experience with your body. It puts the world in a completely new perspective, and the grief that is accompanied with that is so painful, and it is lifelong, and it comes with every single step of childhood and teenage years and adulthood that you experience with your child. It is truly never ending. And I really wholeheartedly believe that the amount of grief that you are capable of having is matched to the amount of love that you have. And that is why grief regarding children, I personally believe, is the deepest grief that you can experience. They had no idea that they could be so grateful and so happy that their daughter survived this experience that was so horrific and traumatic, yet so sad and so angry for what it entailed for her future. Somehow, parents always experience guilt, regardless of how blameless they may be. So Jenica and Gavin struggle with the guilt of just simply not knowing what was going on with Indy in those first 3 weeks of her life, although they never could have. It was completely out of their hands. They did absolutely everything they could, and it really was Jenica and that skin to skin that I believe propelled Indy forward in a way that never could have happened without her mother. I am so grateful that Jenica has felt like connecting with other parents who have been through similar experiences has allowed her to feel human again, and has allowed her to feel less alone in her experience with Indy. January 7th is the day that changed their lives forever. I actually was blown away when I found out that that was the day that Indy stopped breathing. That was actually the exact day that Beckham was diagnosed with cerebral palsy as well. January 7th, although a very heartbreaking, terrifying, traumatic day for both families, was also a very life-altering day that put the entire world into perspective and allowed Jenica and I to both become parents of a disabled child, which has changed us for the better and has allowed us to connect with so many people who are grieving in similar ways. Jenica has said that she had no idea that things could start to ease and she could get used to the life that she now has, but indeed it has gotten easier with all of her different doctor appointments and therapy appointments, and she has expressed that the beautiful part of being a special needs parent has really come to life and come to the forefront of her experience with Indy. Jenica has expressed how grateful she is to be Indy's mother, and that she knows that she was made to do this, and that she is just so grateful that she gets to be the one to experience this life with her. Jenica, Gavin, and Indy will always hold a very special place in our hearts, and we are so honored that they have allowed us to share Indy's story. I would absolutely love nothing more than to share a few more things that could help them in my description box down below. Not only will there be resources for all special needs parents in terms of groups for cerebral palsy parents and support groups that you can join, I will also link Gavin and Jenica's GoFundMe for Indy that will support her medical care, as well as everything that they do that is elective for her that I promise is an expense that you can't even comprehend. Absolutely everything that we can do to help, even if it is going to her Instagram and telling her how special she is and how great she is doing as Indy's mother, will do so much more for her than you can ever understand. So I will have all of their socials linked, their GoFundMe linked, their Venmo linked for any donations that you'd like to give directly to them. Again, we will also be donating 100% of the membership funds, as well as that being matched by Hunter and I. I hope that you enjoyed hearing Indy's story. We are so honored that we've been able to talk about her and share her with you guys. I am so excited for our family next month, and I want to remind you that if you want to nominate a family, then please click the link in my description box down below to submit which family story you'd like me to share next. I hope that you guys enjoyed today's video and that you are happy that this is now a massive part of our channel. I want to send extra love to Jenica and Gavin today. And I also want to remind you to be brave like Beckham and Indy. Love you. Bye.